that you're asking, and Sam and I met a couple years ago out in the country in Colorado, and we was riding horses.
Whew.
Have you been on a horse?
You
since
didn't
then?
say the country. We were in the mountains.
We was in the mountains.
And we got stuck during a snowstorm
Yes.
in the mountains and couldn't get out.
Yes.
It was crazy. Because we were like,
I don't think I've ridden a horse since then.
I went back like a couple weeks ago, and I was like, I will not be on the horse.
Come on, man.
I will not.
Come on.
That horse was crazy. It's just like, you're just like.
Hey, imagine seeing this brother on a horse. You could hear
Remember
him from a mile
horse,
away.
Well,
Like, oh, there's Sam and his group over there.
well, my horse was a little aggressive.
You
and
did.
You know, they tell you have to pull the horse back. And so I'm like, I don't want to, like, destroy the horse. They're like, you got to take charge. I'm like, and my horse is in the bushes. And, oh, my gosh. Whew, I'll never forget. And it wasn't that many black guys.
It wasn't very many black guys
laugh,
at all.
Man. I like your laugh, Doc.
This is true.
I like your
Hilarious.
laugh, Doc.
My whole family, that's the cookout laugh. Don't do this to me. He's doing this.
Oh, God, I'm sorry.
Hey,
All right.
I would love to continue, though. You wrote the book A Greater Story, but you've also done this kind of podcast. I mean, you're everywhere, like everywhere. And like, tell us about the podcast, the story, the evolution of even the book A Greater Story.
Yeah, so after the Steve Harvey show, North Point really
So
specifically.
for those who weren't here today, he was on the Steve Harvey show. And you can go back and I would encourage you to watch that clip because that is a powerful. Can you just explain that moment real quick? Because that's a powerful moment.
Yeah, I mean, and yeah, if they just Google Sam Collier, Steve Harvey, it'll pop up. Just met our biological family after 25 years. And we talked about it this morning. My dad had this vision, this prophetic vision in the barbershop, and we thought he was crazy. And said, Steve Harvey's going to help you find your biological family. And convinced my sister to write into the show. And after writing in, they call us a year later. I mean, just this wild and wacky story, lied to us. And we came on the show, and they said, just kidding, your family's here. And then we just reunited. So it's been a wild ride, to say the least.
So you were on the show. You obviously wrote the book. You talk about it, but talk about kind of your podcast and just how that message has evolved over the years.
Yeah. So after we went on the show, I was at North Point at the time, and Jeff Henderson specifically, who's not there anymore, but he started their Buckhead location and also their Gwinnett location. Used to be over all sports marketing at Chick-fil-A. Saw the story. Andy Stanley had also seen the story, and Jeff said, man, you have to come tell this story at our location. They were in a series called Cast Member, and the idea that we're all in this, movie that God is writing, right? And we each are a cast member in the story, and it's our job to figure out the role. And so he said, you got to come tell your story. And that's kind of where even the tagline, when your story connects to God's story, it leads to a greater story, came from, a part of this whole movie narrative, and that we're all a part of that. And, Jeff said, you just got to just go up there and tell the story. And so he pulled me into a room, and I said, I don't really know how. He said, tell me. He said, okay, say it just like that. And so we did it at North Point, and, kind of the tears that we saw today were very similar at North Point. And we were just, my parents were there because they were in Georgia, and we started doing it at the different campuses that were part of North Point. Then other churches around the country started saying, hey, we need you to come share it with us. And the response was the same everywhere. And out of that, I felt like the Lord was saying, I think I want to do something with this message of a greater story. And so we knew that there would be a book one day, didn't know how we were going to get there, hoping one day we'll do a movie about it. So I'm saying it now so you guys know. And so I said, well, what can we do to kind of get the brand out there? And so I said, what if we started interviewing individuals about their greater story? We all have a story that we're writing, right? And that God is writing with our lives. And so we started interviewing people like Andy Stanley and Lecrae, and at the time, John Christ and Annie Downs, and so many other Christian leaders, Bob Goff, about their stories. And the goal was to see people living in their purpose at the highest level, and to go back to the beginning and ask the question, how did you get there? Because we see where you are, but again, where'd you go to college? What was God doing in your story then? Did you go to college? What happened in high school? And how do we... And the hope was that as people heard others' stories, that they would find a moment in their story that was identical to where they were in their story right now. And that they would say, hey, this is what so-and-so did. maybe if I did that, it'll help me along the journey. So it's been amazing just to see the similarity. And we talked about the idea of surrender this morning, but that's been consistent in every story that we have interviewed.
Come on. It's powerful.
Surrender.
It's good, bro.
It's powerful. Surrender. I'm waiting for my call for the interview.
Listen, I'm ready.
You said you going after the best and the brightest and the.
Well, that's what I'm saying. I mean, I know you were pastor here, then you switched. I'm just waiting. Once you land, I'm just kidding. No,
Hey.
we'll get you on. We got to get you on.
Out all
Brothers.
the people you've interviewed,
Yeah.
who makes the top 1, 2, 3?
Oh, wow.
Because you've interviewed a lot of different people.
Yeah. I will say, John Chris went through a lot over these last 2 years. Big comedian. Went through rehab recently. And I was I was walking him through kind of the rehab stages. And when I say walking him through, I was checking in on him, right? Because when you go through stuff, people just scatter. I had a good friend of mine that said, you know who your friends are, not when things are going well, but when things are going bad.
That's good.
And we all have our imperfections. But it's interesting, interviewing John Chris before that, it was our most listened to episode of all time. Before all that came out. And it was so wild to hear his story about his dad being a pastor and him being the black sheep of his family. Out of 9 brothers and sisters, nobody ever thought he would do anything significant. And so to then go from being this black sheep to packing out the Fox Theater 3 times, to being in Nashville in the Ryman. And, I mean, every massive venue in the States he would pack out just for the glory of God through comedy. And so to watch him go from that to having his moment, to walking him through rehab, and now he's kind of on his way back in a sense, it was just an incredible journey. Lecrae was a very significant interview for me. Lecrae went through a lot over these last 3 years with, I know we'll talk about race a little bit later, but, he kind of came through the evangelical space, kind of built his career on the evangelical church. Now, when I say build, I just mean those are the people that kind of gravitated towards him the most. And then going through this moment of tension when Trayvon Martin gets shot, and he's trying to figure out, how do I emote about this publicly, and realizing we don't all have the same perspective on the situation, and him feeling like his family turned on. I mean, he was just like, and so interviewing him after he kind of came through that, because he kind of had his public breakdown, where he was just, I don't know if it was all happening to him publicly, so everybody was just watching him evolve over this time. And then he finally kind of found his bearings, and then on the other side of it, sitting down and going, okay, what has God shown you now? That interview, and him walking through depression, I mean, he went through a lot during that time. Also, Tadashi, good friend of his, lost his son. It was the same kind of interview, and he was talking about how Lecrae had to come rescue him out of a house because he just left. Everybody wanted to leave his wife because his son died. Like, God, who are you? And then, and that's just the power of community, right? We talk about small groups and all these things. And Lecrae really tracking him down in Houston, running in the house and saying, get your butt back to Atlanta, right? Just like, those are the stories. That's the reality of Christian life. That, and we're talking about even at some point probably the future of the church. This generation wants the reality of life. Right. Not just the ideal, but the real. Right. And that's been missing in a lot of church for a long time. Because honestly, most of our stories are like Tadashi's and like Lecrae's and like John Chris, more than they are just this perfect da-da-da-da-da-da. If we were to pull the curtain back and go, what happened in your life over the last couple months during COVID-19 when you and your wife were fighting in the kitchen, right? Because it's like, get away from me, right? You're around me all the time. How do we navigate when you were struggling with the substance abuse and and the depression and you and the counselor? That's most of our lives, as opposed to just this perfect thing. So it's interesting being able to pull the curtain back and dive into these people's stories. We just see the highlights. Amen. But what about the highs and the lows? Right. And so Annie Downs was a good one too. Loved Annie. Gosh.
So good.
Man, you got me going. We're going.
You've been able to sit down with all of them. I don't know about you, but I think sometimes it's more powerful hearing and pulling other people's story out than telling your own.
100%.
And you do an amazing job of that. You guys got to check out his podcast if you get a chance.
Thank you.
I would love to talk about some of the race stuff.
Yeah.
And your story is so interesting because you've been with Andy Stanley, you've been in multiple different cultures, multiple lanes, you've helped organizations like Chick-fil-A navigate some of the race conversations. What was it, 2 nights ago right here in Omaha, we had 2 white police officers gun down a young African-American. Obviously this summer through COVID and race and riots. And I mean, what's the conversation that you try to help churches specifically, but also organizations navigate when it comes to race?
Wow.
How do you approach that?
You know, I got my first white friend when I went to North Point ever in life. I was 21. So about 21 years of black thought.
Wow.
In the black Mecca, Atlanta.
Wow.
I'm really close with MLK's daughter, Bernice King. And so you're talking about all of that rich history. And then I meet my first white friend for the first time at 21.
Wow.
And we went to eat for 2 years for 4 hours at a time every month.
Wow.
And he asked me every question he had about black people. I asked him every question I had about white people. And white theology, black theology, you know, which is a thing.
Yeah.
And we both walked out of those 2-year meetings different.
Wow.
We both realized there was something we thought about that was wrong about the other side. And me and you talked about this because you're interracial, right? You grew up from an interracial family. And I always say, I think the people that have the best perspectives on this race conversation are those that live in both worlds. Because there's always something that you think you see that's different from what you think you see.
Right.
And so one of the things I try to do when I'm sitting with leaders on both sides is help them understand that on each side there's blind spots.
Right.
And one of the ways I explain it is like, the night after Trump got elected the first time, right? Well, got elected. Was the craziest, the morning was the craziest morning of my life. I mean, it was just because I have a ton of white friends that are Republicans and a ton of black friends that are Democrats. And I was getting phone calls from both of them at the same time, back to back that morning. And my white friends were trying to figure out why my black friends were so angry. And my black friends were trying to figure out why my white friends didn't know why they were angry. I mean, it was just like this, like, And I try to point things out to all my friends and my leader friends. I'm going, you know, you realize 80% of the evangelical vote went to Trump when he got elected. And about 80% of the black Christian vote went the other way. The thing I try to go is let's put all that right here and step back and go, how are we both Christians?
Yeah.
But we land in different spaces.
Yep.
That's not just like, either you take the perspective of, well, the white Christians are crazy, or you go, the black Christians are crazy. I don't think it's either. But it's indicative of the different worlds that we live in. That we serve the same God, but see politics and race totally different. And so I don't even try to, before we even jump into who's right or wrong, I try to just go, let's just step back for a moment and recognize the fact that that's a reality, which means that we're living in 2 Americas. And so how do we now begin to make our way to the other side of one another to understand each other? Because the first thing you have to recognize, and I always say, is that there is a gap.
Yeah.
It's not just that which means that your perspective on either side is probably flawed. So we both have things to learn.
Yeah.
And if we can first get to the point to where we go, there's something I need to learn.
Right.
There's something I need to learn on both sides. Then we can have a healthy conversation. But the problem is that for many of us, we missed that first step.
Yeah.
So then we jump into conversations going, I'm right. And the moment there's an idea that's introduced on either side that's different, we just demonize the other side and say, no, you're wrong, and you're this and you're that. And so I'll say that, so without that empathetic mindset and without that recognition that there may be something that's happening that I don't see on either side, the conversation becomes very difficult to have. So if I can get leaders on the black side and on the white side to recognize that there are gaps somewhere
Sure.
first, then we can go, okay, now let's fill the gap. How come you voted Democrat, right? And you serve God? Like, what is how come you voted Trump and you serve, like, take me into your mind. And it's in that conversation that we go, I get it. I get it.
I got a follow-up question with that because, number one, thank you so much. That's crazy. 21 years old, you met your first white friend.
21.
That's
Changed my life.
Wow. Okay.
Changed my life.
But I also know that you really don't have authority over things unless you get, number one, if you're forgiven. You know what I'm saying? If you've experienced that forgiveness. Also, over things that you really don't love. You know what I mean? I always say this, like, we don't have authority over things that we don't love, man. So it's cool just kind of hearing your story, but what was kind of that blind spot, you know what I'm saying, personally, that you figured, like, I had to wrestle this one out. This one was a hard one. Maybe there was some obvious stuff, but maybe there was some deeper stuff that I had to really, really go there, you know what I'm saying, to fully get healing.
Oh, wow.
Sorry.
That was a big one.
Yeah.
I think several moments that I'll give you, and I want to talk about a big moment in the middle of Black Lives Matter this past summer when the riots were out of control around the world. I'll land there. But I'll start with, so you know I did a lot of work in the inner city. We reached 80,000 kids in a year, and we just went to the poorest parts of the city. Obviously, most of the poorest parts in the city were black people. It just was what it was, especially in Atlanta. Places like the Fourth Ward, places like, MLK Boulevard, which is kind of crazy. Every MLK Boulevard you go to is like the hood. It's weird around the country. It's very weird, You find MLK's like, I'm in the hood. Is that me?
I have no idea what that was. Was that you? Sorry.
Are we good? We good. But I'll start with this moment. So when we went into these poor areas for 3 years, and we saw all types of stuff. I was in a middle school one time, and we asked a question to a room full of middle school 7th grade girls, all black, maybe a little Hispanic, maybe one or two Hispanic. And we said, how many of you have seen abuse? 80% of the room. Literally. And we're going, you're in 7th grade, right? And so I'm going, well, what did you see? And they were normal. It was normal. Oh, yesterday my mom got hit in the head with the end of a gun from her boyfriend. Like, okay. Oh, yeah, yesterday, my mother burned my dad with the end of a cigarette. Like, you're just like, whoa, like, and it was just, it was everyday stuff. And so you start going, this is what's happening in these war zones in our backyard. That's why we got missions overseas. We got missions here, too. And so we're talking about for 3 years serving those types of kids in those families, people with nothing. We talk about my family going 3 days without food, same thing. But an everyday experience for so many African Americans and Hispanics, and every now and then you find one white person in the room. It's like, you in the hood. You know what I'm saying? It's just crazy. So after 3 years of this, your heart starts to see the darkest parts of society, especially America. We had a chapter in Harlem. We had a chapter in Atlanta. We had a chapter in New Orleans, Alexandria. We had a chapter in Rome, Georgia, which is more of the country, and we just see this poverty. So coming to North Point, which is in Alpharetta, which is the richest part. You got the president of Home Depot. You got president of Chick-fil-A. Everybody got money. Average income $100,000. It just is what it is. And so I remember standing by the stage, getting ready to go preach to these high school students. And I look out in the audience, and it's 1,500 high school students at one location. And probably 95% white. And I'm going, these kids, like, they probably all got cars. Most of their moms, are millionaires. Most of them. I'm like, there's not a care in the world. They live out here in Alpharetta. It's total opposite from Fourth Ward, from abuse, I'm even having to change my mind. And I remember being upset with God because I'm like, before I went on stage when I was in the hood, I would just be thinking about every problem. I'm like you in the back. I'm just like, I'm going to go out here. You're right. The enemy is going down today, even though I can't say Jesus, right? You know what I'm saying? And so I'm like, I'm like, this person's dealing with this, abuse, poverty, racial unrest. And I'm backstage trying to do the same thing. And I'm like, I remember saying to God, they don't need me. And I'm upset. I'm like, I'm wasting my time. I'm doing this. Take me back to the hood. They don't need me. And the Lord, he says to me, I have this encounter before I go on stage. He said, I love all of them. I mean, it was just like, he was like, and they do need you. They have their own problems in a different way. Maybe in this situation, their father isn't there. But maybe out here, their father is there, but he's gone. Suicide is through the roof over here, while poverty is through the roof over here. And I remember the Lord saying to me, until you start to see every race through my lens,
wow,
I'm not going to help you with the ones you want me to help you with.
wow.
And he broke my heart and challenged me to start seeing through his eyes.
Wow.
And and my heart broke for the white community as much as it broke for the black community.
Wow.
And it didn't lessen my heart breaking for the black community because I'm black.
Yeah.
But it took my mind, it expanded my view. And I realized that we always tend to care about the people that look like us the most. And until our hearts can break for and that's why when I teach on race and in politics and all that, I always challenge individuals to say, I know your heart broke for your community, but did it break for the other?
Wow.
Because I try to flip it. I try to say, here's what I had to go through. Now let's reverse this on your end and ask you the question, do you care about black kids as much as you care about your kids? Does it matter? So that's one situation. Yes, the Black Lives Matter situation. The other thing that I realized, and a lot of my black friends were coming to this realization, and my white friends, and I was really encouraged over this past summer, which most people are surprised to hear. Yeah. When you do the work of racial, whatever you want to call it, we've been doing it for the last 3 or 4 years. So this summer was like, oh, this is like field day. Like, let's go. Everybody's ready to talk. While for many people, it was like, what is happening in America? It's like, it's been happening, but now you can't ignore it. Mm-hmm. And so when all this was going on, I did have a breakdown like 1 week, but we can talk about that later. And then after that next week, I started hearing something from my black friends and my white friends, and it was specific to that because that's where the tension was mostly. It was an interesting moment. A lot of my white friends, and not all, because there were a lot of white friends that I had that were like marching in the streets too. You know what I'm saying? Like, oh. But a lot of my white friends that were never really engaged in the conversation started calling me and saying, I think I missed something. And for the first time, it was, maybe there's a problem with some of the law enforcement. Not all, but maybe there's a remnant of something. While that would have never been the case, maybe I missed something. And my black friends started calling me and saying, man, I don't think white people actually knew what was going on. It's not that they hate me. It's that they don't know. And those two statements, huge.
Yeah.
Those are foundational statements that change, that it's a paradigm shift. Because if you can look at your white brother and sister and say, you don't hate me, and I thought you did. Because you're saying all lives matter and da-da-da-da-da and all, like, it's not that you hate me, you just don't understand. Whew.
Yeah.
Now I got empathy for you.
Wow.
Because I realized you grew up in a world that didn't teach you about my struggle. You grew up in a world that you don't understand my history. So it's not that you don't care, it's that you don't know.
It's good.
And then on the other side, when you have white people going, maybe I missed something. Maybe now we see unity happening.
Yeah.
And you know, I mean, your own family, I'm sure. So
It's good.
let me stop.
So good. You got another 30 minutes?
I
just want to hear you laugh, Doc.
I'm in. I mean, I'm like, I love this combo. This is the future of America. This is how we come together. The church has to lead the way. Don't get me started.
Come on.
Come on, that's where
And
I
that's
wanted
where
to
you're
go.
going. That's where you're going.
Because you talk about, the church has to lead the way.
Church has to lead the way.
Amen.
What role can and should the church play that nobody else can play? And I know for you in this next season, in planting a church, that's part of your heart, and would love to just hear kind of your vision for what that can look like. But maybe to start with, man, what role can and should the church play in this conversation that nobody else can play? And how do we help churches move in that direction?
Yeah. One of the reasons we decided to go with Hillsong, and we'll talk a little about the Carl Lentz stuff, and I know we want to talk about that a little later, which we've been walking through. It's been a hard season for Hillsong, but still encouraged. It hadn't impacted what we're doing in Atlanta. Just really, the entire Hillsong world, the body of Christ, has just been mourning. But to answer the question, in full, this is our vision for what we want to do in Atlanta, but also, and it's answering the question of what role should the church play. During this summer, I think we would all say we've never seen racial unrest like this in our generation. I mean, it hadn't been like this since like the 60s. Yeah. And it's not the same as what was happening in the 60s, obviously, but it had not been that heightened, which is good and also, crazy. But my question started becoming, in the middle of the civil unrest worldwide, I always say the double pandemics, right? The racial pandemic and then the coronavirus. My question started being, where's the church?
Come on.
That was the biggest question I had.
Man.
I'm like, and I had so many friends calling me going, we need a leader. I don't know if you got that a lot. We need a leader. I mean, white friends, but we need somebody to lead us out of this. Like, we don't know who to look to. And everybody was just like, who do we follow? And the answer is the church is who we should follow. When we go back to the 60s, it was MLK. He was a preacher, though. I think people forget that he was actually a preacher. And they galvanized the civil rights movement out of churches in Alabama. The Montgomery Improvement Association. It's a collection of churches that came together, and pastors that said, on the back of Jesus, we're going to lead this country out of this.
Wow.
And on the other side of love, right, with love as the foundation, God is going to deliver our nation. And there was change that happened, but it was the church and pastors and leaders coming together going, this is where we're going to go. I mean, you just think about it. The entire world followed a preacher. That was crazy.
Wow.
And so my biggest question this summer was, where's the church? And unfortunately, we were disappointed because churches didn't know what to do. So many churches, white and black, were just like, I don't want to lose everything trying to unite the country. Right? It's like people were trying to figure out, what can I say? What can I say?
Yeah.
And it was because we waited until it got too bad to lead. It was already, now it's like, no, you can't like just start now all of a sudden and, well, here's what we need, and we didn't know what to do because it's something that we should have been leading on 2 years ago, 3 years ago, 4 years ago, 5 years ago. MLK's greatest criticism of the church was that they were silent when things were the worst. And I remember him saying, it's not the racist that concern me the most. It's the people of goodwill that I thought would be with us. And so I think the role of the church is always supposed to be the conscience of the nation. Supposed to set the tone. And unfortunately, we have separated justice and redefined justice, taken justice out of the gospel. And we've made it political instead of a heart issue.
That's good, man.
And it's really the work of the enemy. It's the enemy, let's just take something that's about humanity and make it political. Because if you can make it political, then we don't have to talk about it. And then we can fight about it. And it's like, no, like this is a humanitarian issue that's something wrong in our society. And I think over this summer we saw that. And so I think the church and Bridge is an example. Me and you talked about it. You and I talked about it. You know, that the foundation of this church was to be a model for how cultures can come together. If we don't model it in the church, then we'll never be it in society and in the world. Unfortunately, we've had to look to corporate organizations for how to be unified.
Yeah.
Because we're always 20 years behind. I mean, Pepsi and Coca-Cola, and they've been doing it for a while. We're talking about secular institutions that are better at racial and, harmony than the church.
Yeah.
It's still the most segregated hour in America, Sunday morning. And so that's our vision for Atlanta, that God would do from Atlanta what he did 60 years ago or 40 years ago in using a church to model unity.
Come on, man.
And when we sat down with Brian Houston, that was my vision. And that was my question. Like, here's my vision. And they gave us two choices. You can be Hillsong Family, which is a partner division, or you can be a Hillsong Church. And my biggest thing was, our number one priority is modeling unity and talking about issues of justice and helping us bridge the gap between our two worlds.
Come on, man.
And if we're able to do that, then and we actually sat down, which was really ironic because we set the meeting up 5 months in advance, and it landed in the middle of Black Lives Matter.
Wow.
Which, like, nobody knew that was going to happen.
Wow.
And we're meeting as riots are happening around the world.
Wow.
And Brian, he's like, we have to be a part of this. This is what we want to do. This is the direction we want to go in.
Wow.
And honestly, it is sad because it's sad, but it's also providential that one of their largest voices on race, which was Carl Lentz in New York, as I'm coming in, he's going out. And it was a very, it was a sad thing for all of us. But God is still on the move.
Come on.
And luckily, and by the grace of God, it's not impacted us at all. And interestingly enough, I tell people, I'm like, Hillsong is 150,000 members around the world. They've got a church on every continent, from Berlin to Paris to South Africa to Kenya to Australia to Tokyo. Hillsong New York was 10,000 members. So in comparison to the global movement, it hasn't impacted the impact. But it was a little sad that as I'm coming in to continue what he started, he's leaving. So.
Wow, it's good. Wow. All right. Man, well, here's what I would love to do. We did say that we were going to shut down at 1:30. But if you need to go, this would be a great time for you to go. But I do want to open it up for some Q&A as well. Could we do that now? Could we do that for maybe several minutes? You know what I'm saying? If you need to go, God bless you. Thank you so much for being here. Is this my microphone? Are you sure?
Because you're holding the bottom.
All right. Oh, it's because I'm holding the bottom. All right.
It's blocking the signal. Sorry, a little audio.
Blocking the signal. All right. Well, that's cool. Well, hey, number one, thank you. Can we thank him so much for real already? Pastor Sam. I know there's a lot of questions, man. So is it okay if we just open it up for some Q&A? Yeah? Y'all cool with that? Who got a question that they want to, that's like they bursting? Matt, how did I know that you were going to be the first one to have a question? Can you just yell it out just because I don't want everybody messing with those microphones? Is that okay? Can you just yell it out and then we can just answer? Is that cool?
I'll start with the second.
Matt, you would come with a theological question. I like it. Okay.
Yeah, he asked me what instruments I played. My first was saxophone, alto sax, which is really kind of like, when and I started in 6th grade, so it's like the elementary band. You really only had like 5 instruments. It's like trumpet, sax, flute. So sax was one. Then I went to performing arts school for saxophone and voice. Then I started playing the tuba. Then I started playing baritone. Then I switched to piano. Then picked up the guitar, xylophone. And so I can only still play the piano and the guitar. But I still kind of understand. I can remember some of the woodwind instruments and a little bit of the brass and all that. And the guitar. I can play enough guitar to write a song. I'll say that. But don't pay me to play the guitar. I think theologically, and I think you referencing Philippians, the idea that God wills us to do good. Am I right? Yeah, I think the idea of willed, and I would have to do an exegesis of the text to really fully comment on it. But I do think the point of that is to say that he nudges us, and the Spirit nudges us in the right direction to do good. However, it is still our choice. I think, it's interesting. I always tell people this. It's that, God's grace is sufficient for all of us, right? Where much sin abounds, much more grace abounds. And what we've seen in the church over the last few years is this theology of grace that is really absent of sin. We've seen a lot of that happening. It's like, God loves you. And we don't really, I had somebody text me when we announced Hillsong, are you going to preach on sin? I was like, sure, right? Because, but I understood the question, because if you're not careful, then your theology will become about, I can do anything and God still loves me. And that's actually true. However, sin does have consequences in the now. And so most people don't, work it out. So that's why I say wills us to do good. Like, he can nudge us to do good. And I think a part of us doing good is being able to understand theologically how sin impacts us and doesn't. That when God is asking us to do good, he knows in us doing good, it will create good in our lives. I do think that's a theological framework that isn't taught much, because we kind of stray away from this sin conversation, because then it's like, well, now do I have to talk about hell? Where does this all go? So anyway, to answer the question shortly, without doing a full exegesis on the text, which I would love to do and come back and do a whole sermon on it, is I think he nudges us to do it, but it's still up to us in the outworking of our faith and discipleship to choose it every day. And if we don't, there's real life consequences. So
that's good.
Good. Well said.
Good.
And to your point, one more thing.
Go ahead.
I won't comment on that. Never mind. I was going to talk about Carl, but go ahead. You go.
No.
I'm not going to talk about it.
All right. Let's move on. All right. Thanks for the questions. All right. Who else got a question or a comment? Oh, the bishop. He don't like when I call him the bishop. Pastor Ron, what you got for us, sir?
That's your dad. OG. Look, I didn't know. He told me. I knew he was mixed, and he didn't tell me which one of y'all was black and white. And so when I came in today, I heard somebody shouting, and the Spirit said to me, I think that's his dad. So I turned around and you're white. I was like, that's not his dad. And so he leaned over to me. He said, that's the OG. I'm like, the white guy? He said, yeah. I said, oh, your dad's white, not your mom. He was like, yes. I was like, I got to meet him. I got to meet him. I love it. Sorry, guys. I love you, man. I was thinking about you the whole service. Okay. He's got so much flavor. It's ridiculous. It's like, what? He can probably dance, too. That's what I'm saying. Just a little bit. Okay, so, sorry, guys. Brother moment. MLK, how do we see this generation? You know, it's interesting because I had a breakdown 2 weeks into the Black Lives Matter thing, literally a breakdown, where I was in my room at 2 a.m. and my wife she didn't know what to do. She walked in and she was just like, do you want me to pray for you? Like, she just didn't know what to say because I was so like, I was just out of, she's like, I just got to leave you alone. Like, God's going to work it out. And I'm on my bed just like, and I'm upset and I'm mad at black people, white people, not Asians or Hispanics, really just black and white. And I'm mad at both sides because I'm going, you know, why? Like, we've had this conversation so long about our community experiencing pain and all of these things. And there was just like it was like, I'm like, this is the worst it's ever gotten. And the response, whether you agree or not with, I'm not talking necessarily about the writing, but just the emotion that was in the minority community during that time. The hurt, the sadness that was apparent, that you would feel so angry to the point where you think you have to riot and burn things, that the response to that is still not empathy or compassion. It's, I'm going to fight you harder. And this is an overgeneralization because this was not everybody. These are certain pockets. So I was angry at that. I'm like, what do we have to do? But then I was also angry at many of my leaders on the black side that trained me in nonviolence and in love through action, but would not speak into the violence that our culture felt like we needed to run in. And I'm like, I don't know where to stand. And I felt like, this is what you taught me, that love is ultimately going to produce the way. Doesn't mean that we don't speak truth to power. Doesn't mean that we're not present. Doesn't mean that we don't protest. But the burning and the looting and that's only going to lead us to more of that. And nobody was speaking out on it. And I didn't know which way to go. Because I'm like, wait, that's not even a Jesus ethic. That's not what Jesus teaches. And many of us are Christians that's burning cars. You know what I mean? I was just like, and nobody was leading. And so I was angry on both sides. And I remember texting MLK's niece, not his daughter, but his niece, so upset, so hurt, so lost, really. I was like, why, if I'm the only one trying to bring us closer together, and then why am I'm not, if nobody else cares. And she said to me, you know, you got to fight from where you stand. You have to stand on what you believe in. You have to pray that God would do what only he can do. But then she said something, and this is answer the question a really, really, really long way. She said, many are not educated on what it takes to produce a cultural revolution. It's the education that many of our generation is missing in terms of what is the reason for protest. The whole goal of protesting is to create awareness so that you can sit back down at the table and negotiate change. MLK would describe protest as direct action. Many people hear direct action and think violence, but that's not what he's saying. He would always say, when you talk about the idea of Kingian nonviolence, it's a philosophy in which he would say that he got his methodology from Gandhi and his philosophy from Jesus. And together they created Kingian nonviolence. But within it, you protested so you could sit down. The whole goal at the end of the day was to get us all back to the table so that we could sit down, create relationship that would ultimately lead to systemic change through laws and through all these other things. So I think, to your point, I think that we're the most connected generation in history. We could really change things really fast. The problem is many of us are not fully educated in what it takes to produce cultural revolution. So what happens is we have a lot of anger and and we know we need to do something, but we really don't know how to channel that passion. And here's the big one, into strategy. An example is the NBA boycotted. And for many people, it was like, wow, you're leveraging your platform to bring awareness to something. But the question, and I don't know if it was LeBron or somebody, they kept having to ask, well, what's the point of this, though? It was like, at the end of this, what are we actually trying to do besides just because if it's just bringing awareness, that's half the battle. You protest, you create, and it was really, and I don't want to get into this, but when Jay-Z was kind of going through this with the NFL and Kaepernick and all these other things, the tension around it was, and while I don't agree with everything that went down in every aspect, either on both sides, the question that kept ringing out was, well, how long are we going? I think we all got the point now that there's an issue in America. But what are we leveraging the protest for? We're going to kneel and create all this unrest. What's the next step? And so I think that that's what we're missing in this generation is a next step, a strategy. Okay, we can demonstrate, but what does that look like? So I think after that, after the idea of demonstration and awareness, I do think we need to sit down and actually come up with strategy for systemic change. And I think, I'll just go there. I think this is one of my issues with, and I talked to a lot of civil rights activists on this, with Black Lives Matter, the organization. We had a moment during this summer where at one time, the majority of the world was screaming Black Lives Matter. The majority of the world. In other words, it had transcended the organization, and it became a statement that represented what we believed in. It was like, no, let's unpoliticize it. We believe Black Lives Matter. And then it got derailed because we started attaching, well, it's about this now, and it's about this now, and it's about this now. And many churches split, like many pastors pulled out because they're like, well, I don't, the foundations of that and all of these other things, I don't agree with that, but I do agree with the statement. So now anytime you say the statement, you have to say, well, it's not that I'm talking about the organization, I'm talking about the statement, and da-da-da-da-da. And the problem was, and this I had a lot of conversations with black leaders, and white leaders about this, is it was too much at one time. It was like you were trying to lift black lives, but then we're also trying to solve this issue over here, and we're trying to solve this issue over here, and we're trying to solve this issue over here. And the problem is many of us don't agree on that issue or that one, but we do agree with this one. When you conflate the message, you try to knock out too much at one time, you get nothing done. And so when you go back and look at the civil rights movement, they started with buses. It was the Montgomery bus boycott. And then they moved to lunch counter sit-ins. And then they moved to voting. But they didn't go, well, let's try to desegregate the buses and voting and get business at one time, because they wouldn't have got anything done. It was too much. And so I think for us, it does look like when we talk about strategy, we got to pick an issue that we can all rally around, solve that one, and then move to the next. And then solve that one and then move to the next. So I just think it's back to what MLK's niece was saying, is I think we've got to come together and be educated so that we can create change.
So good. Well said, well said. Great. A couple more. Be bold. Kevin. Hey.
You knew we had.
Be bold. Be bold. Don't hold anything back. We got leaders in the room. Nothing you say will be held against you.
I love it. Nice. The Astro Band. me repeat it back. What we see in the rear view is different. And therefore, for some white individuals, they like what they see because they don't see it the way that we see it. Is that right? Yeah. Right. Wow. Powerful. We could be here all day. Thanks, guys. No, I mean, I'll share a little bit. I won't knock it all out, but I will say, the whitewashing of history has hurt all of us. Black, white, Asian, Hispanic, it's hurt all of us. When you remove the reality of what happened, you get where we are today. I was talking to a historian actually yesterday, which is very ironic. And he was explaining to me how the history of the Confederate flag had been changed over the years. And this was done way back, like after the Civil War and after some other, that there was, there were many individuals, like at the end of the day, it was economic war, fighting really to keep slavery and some other things. But he was saying to me how the history was changed much back then after the war was lost to make it more about freedom and about business. And it was changed to kind of take the sting out of what the Civil War really was and what the Confederate flag really represented. And so what happened was you had a generation of my white friends that grew up thinking the Confederate flag was not about this, but about heritage and about freedom and about this and what it represented, absent of, well, the main thing was this. And so that's, to your point, that's how we end up in this world where it's like, I hate this flag, or I love the flag, or I do this, or this, is that we've whitewashed history so much. One, and a little bit of it was done to keep some of the systemic oppression in place. Because if I can hide it, then we don't have to deal with it. And a little bit of it was done to try to forget about it. It's like, it's a negative part of our history. That wasn't us, that was our ancestors. We want to move on. We want to move forward. And so to your point, I do think what I found this past summer and in my conversations with my white friends and massive white leaders that are exactly like you, I mean exactly, control so much, love Jesus, good people. What I found helps them the most in the conversation is walking through the history. And in many conversations, they go, I did not know that, right? Like, that's happening or that happened? Wow. And that's why a lot of my black friends realized that this past summer. They went, whoa, okay, we're approaching this wrong. But this goes back to MLK's, we talk about that education, 6 steps to Kingian nonviolence, and there's 6 principles. And the first step to Kingian nonviolence is information gathering. The second one is education. The third one is personal commitment. I won't go through the rest. But if you go information gathering, education, and personal commitment, the idea of information gathering is that before you decide on a solution or what to do, you have to first understand every side of the problem. And so that's why I always say, you were talking about this. I don't trust anybody speaking out on race issues if they're black and don't have a white friend. I don't trust white people that speak on race issues if they're white and doesn't have a black friend. Because both sides lack context. You have to do information gathering first and go, help me understand how you, and that's what happened this past summer. Many of my black friends go, oh, wait, it's not this, it's this. Because when you get close to it and you start having conversation, that's why I always say, it's all about relationship. Relationship. People don't like that answer because they think it's soft. But what I want to explain to them is it's actually the biggest thing that you could do when you start building relationships with the opposite culture. Now we actually sit down and we can talk from a place of love, and I can explain to you my life and my history and my story. And it's not, I don't know you, so I don't care. And I got to give a story, and I'm done, about the power of relationship. Very wealthy white woman, very wealthy. I mean, probably a billionaire. Controlled so much in the city of Atlanta. I met her through MLK's daughter, and Republican, strong, like her husband was a large part of medical technology, always at the White House, so very strong in the perspective. And we became friends. Trayvon Martin gets shot. And I had a roommate at the time, and my roommate starts crying. So she knows my roommate, she knows me. But we didn't necessarily agree on politics, and I'm not a Republican or a Democrat. I'm actually politically homeless, which we can talk about that later. Because I think both sides are just like either they're going way left or way right. It's just like, I think we need a third party, but don't quote me on that. The moderate party is what I think we should go. And so she calls me, and she's like, what's going on? Like, what's up with this Trayvon Martin thing? I just want you to help me understand it. I don't get it. Help me. And I said, well, you know, it's been kind of wild because Antoine's been crying all day. And she said, whoa. She said, why is Antoine crying? And for the next 2 hours, we didn't talk about what happened. It was, why is Antoine crying? For 2 hours. And she didn't necessarily walk away going, I get what happened in the Trayvon Martin case, but she walked away going, I think I'm missing something because Antoine's crying. And I know Antoine, and I love Antoine, and I want to figure out why he's crying. And she walked down that road, and it illuminated her understanding of America, period. And now she's totally, like, she be marching. I mean, it's like and I don't think everybody needs to be marching, but I do think she came into a greater understanding of history and of her blind spots, which I've had to do on the white side as well, of just understanding, because again, because God loves all of us, right where we are. And anyway.
Wow. That's really good. Does anybody have something that's super pressing? Because I do want to wrap up.
Yeah, I mean, what was great about Alabama was that they were just focused on Alabama. Honestly, Montgomery. And it was just that city. And it became so large that it got to the White House, and then it changed the whole country because they changed the law for Montgomery. And so I think the next step, if I were to give three, I think the first one is there has to be an organization or a point of unity that everybody can come around. It doesn't help us to be in silos. I think a lot of us think that I got my thing, you got your thing. We got to figure out how to come together in one place. Who cares who the leader is or who the leaders are? I mean, and MLK would describe it as the drum major instinct. He would say that's one of the greatest threats to progress. Everybody wanting to be in charge. The drum major instinct. We all want to lead the band. And that's all throughout our generation. We don't want to follow anybody. It's like, no, I got my thing. You got your, right? It's like, I'll show up if we all are going to be. It's like, come on, like, we got to come together. We got to put down this, I want to be the face of it, and just go, I just want to be a part of the solution. So I think that's one thing. There has to be a concerted effort where everybody comes together in one place and we go, all right, we're going to walk now. And then after that, I think you got to pick one issue. Doesn't matter what it is. Doesn't matter what it is. One issue in this city that you can change. And then y'all knock that out. And you come together and you move forward. And you get everybody involved. We could talk later about different strategies and all of that. But I do think if you can come together and get one thing done, you'll get another thing done and another thing. And you look up, this city will be changed. And then Omaha will become an example for the nation. Because what we're missing is models. Again, going back to the church, we're missing models that the country can look to. Montgomery worked because it was a model. It was like, oh, this is how you do it. Oh, let's do that over here and then they just put it everywhere. When you really think about it, it's like, where can we go in America and find a model? Where can we go? You can't really think of one place where you go, all right, white people and black people are going to get, this is a society that's where, once we get a model, though, whew, so that's what I'd say. Got the nonprofit. We're all here, right? Seems like it needs to be this. Everybody just come together and figure it out. So that's what I would say.
Well, that's what's up. Before we close, man, any final thoughts, man, before you go, bro? I just want to let you have the last word, brother.
If y'all want to donate to Hillsong Atlanta, we are in our fundraising season, and they will help us when we don't raise, but we need help in a pandemic. No, seriously, just need your prayers and your love, and hopefully I can come back and spend more time. This would just be amazing. If y'all figure out something y'all want to do, pick an issue. I'll help. I'm in. Love y'all.
Appreciate you, brother. Hey, can you just close us in prayer, man, as we
Sure.
close out?
God, we know that your spirit is nudging daily to will us to do good. We just ask that as your spirit nudges, that we would surrender, that we would heed to the call of the kingdom. God, I just pray right now that you would make Omaha a model. God, let systemic change and racial unity happen here like never before. God, and I pray that it would happen through these individuals in this room. That they would be a remnant that led this city into a cultural revolution. That they would be an example that the world, that the nation can look to for how we come together and how we move forward and how we create unity but also justice. Let the wrongs of history be righted in this city. God, I pray for a revival in this city like never before, that people will come to know Christ in a way like never before, that the church would be an example, that those that don't even believe in Jesus would remark at what this church is about. That they would see followers of Jesus and want to become one and want to join the fight. We believe this is not on accident. You are planting a seed here, and you will do something, God. Let this not just be one conversation that leads to nothing, but let it lead to a revolution. God, we love you and we praise you. Begin to heal our hearts. I pray for those that are even going through COVID and in financial stress, that you would open up the doors and you would flood their bank accounts and give them opportunities and increase their businesses and their jobs and heal them, even for those that are sick. We pray that COVID will come to an end so that we can continue to do your work. In Jesus' name, amen.
Wow, wow, wow. Come on. All right, I got it, Colin. Thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. One more time, y'all. Pastor Sam Collier, thank you so much. We could have kept on going. Too good, too good, too good.